Hello and welcome to the Tillage Edge with me, Michael Hennessy. This is your regular update for all your tillage news and advice. On the Tillage Edge a couple of weeks ago, we discussed 2021 and how that was for tillage farmers in Ireland. Whether you're a grain farmer in Ireland, France, the Ukraine, USA or Argentina, we're all at the mercy of weather and it can be a huge ally or even play havoc in any given year. This year was one of those years. This year was terrific for Ireland, but not so great for many farmers around the world, especially in Canada and South America. We touched base with Andy Mahon, a farm manager in the UK at the start of the summer, and Andy is joining us today to chat about how his farming year progressed and also a view as regards to UK farming this year. Andy, you're very welcome and it's great to have you back in the podcast again. So Andy, how are you since we last spoke and how would you describe how 2021 treated you this year?
It's not been too bad. We had interesting harvest. Not well, it's one to remember, but probably not for the right reasons. Some good reasons are bad, and a great autumn. We've had a fantastic. The weather through from September, October, November has been amazing. I mean, even today we're middle of December, and I don't need a coat. It's really mild outside. It's bizarre sort of weather. So, it's not been too bad. Thanks.
Been pretty good. Great. So when we last spoke to you in June, you were saying at the time you were generally speaking relatively happy with your crops at that stage. And maybe before we get to the yields and harvest, how did it turn out in terms of, or were you happy with your disease control strategy that you put in place, or maybe even your weed control strategy you put in place?
So, just running through each of the crops, winter wheat, it was looking good in June. June turned quite wet with us. And my strategy had been sort of fairly lean up to that point. And I did some Bayer rapid tests for Septoria leading up to sort of post T2, I suppose, sort of post flag leaf sprays, just prior to ear wash. And I had a chat with a guy from Bayer who's a good friend of mine. And he'd been doing rapid testing weekly through the season on his trial site, which is about an hour south of me. And he said there's been no sign of Septoria, and then suddenly it started to come in a bit later on. So we'd only used one SCHI at T2. That was the only time we put an SCHI in the crop. So I went with an SCHI at T3, which by luck, I suppose, and a little bit of judgment there, that paid dividends, I think, because the tail end of the growing season was quite wet leading into harvest. Disease pressure really ramped up. Septoria-wise, certainly towards the end of the season, and the spring crops were fine. They motored on through okay, and it was very strange coming into harvest. It was sort of dull, overcast weather. We cut the winter wheat probably right at the very end of July, I guess now.
Okay,
and that surpassed my expectations. It didn't look any different to any other crop I've grown, but we averaged close to 11 tons a hectare, which is unbelievable for us. We're normally around 9.2, 9.3 is normally what I budget. So I was absolutely staggered with that result.
It's a big bonus for you this year then, Andy, if that's the case.
Yeah. I don't really know why. A lot of it was after peas, so that obviously helped. But yeah, we must have done something right because I was absolutely gobsmacked with that yield. So that was great.
And I suppose just to remind everyone, Andy, just in case they forget maybe a little bit, but that's all on a no-till system.
Yeah, zero till, so no cultivations. It was all just direct drill with a disc drill, all the winter wheat. So and I mean there's a fair range in that. We had one field did close to 13 tons a hectare after peas, and then we had some that was nearer our sort of average at 9. So there's a good range of yields there. The standout variety was Crusoe. Has always been pretty consistent for us. We grow quite a lot for Warburton's bread, and that proteins were low because of the high yields, I think. But and X-Days as well. X-Days was really good, yielded really well. I feel it just looked good all the way through. So definitely a variety. We've grown a little bit more of that this year. So
how about your spring crops, Andy?
So spring crops were less. Spring wheat was less good. We had again the growing season very frosty through April, so it was very slow getting going. Very dull, overcast through sort of early part of the summer. So not a vintage year for spring crops. We were probably more like the sort of 4.5-5 ton a hectare on spring wheat, which that's quite disappointing, really. It's cheap to grow, but even at that, that's not terribly exciting for us. Last year and previous years, we've been more 6 to, probably average just over 6 ton a hectare. So we're probably a ton a hectare down on the spring wheat. The oats did very well. Again, our long-term average is probably about 5.5 tons for spring oats, and we were bang on that again this year. Oat straw was very green at harvest though, and but the bushel weights were very good on the oats. I can't remember off the top of my head now what they were, but they've made milling grades, so they're leaving the farm next month. So pretty happy with that.
Okay. And as you went through the harvest, Andy, was it kind enough to you? Over here in Ireland, we got a really good run at it, probably exceptional really, with winter barley's coming in at 12% moisture content, bit of rain, and then it just went lovely and smoothly. How did it work out for yourselves?
I've seen a few lads over here describe it as the wettest dry harvest we've ever had, and that about sums it up. We had very little rain, but heavy dews, dull, cloudy days with no wind, no sunshine, moisture sat at sort of 17-18% in the wheat, all, just day after day like that, just not getting any wetter, but not getting any drier either.
That sounds like Ireland. You were essentially farming in Ireland in England last year. That's
exactly that. It's just cloudy all the time. I think that was the killer. There was no wind, and it was just cloudy, and it felt relentless, really. It was warm and everything, but just the moisture just weren't coming down. And so we dried virtually everything. We've got on-floor drying, so we've got 4 big sheds that hold about 900 tons in each bay. So we dried everything pretty much, bar a few loads that we didn't dry. But it was an expensive harvest in that respect in terms of drying and stuff. But it's all safely, and the quality's been. It's all the bushel weights are good. Hagbergs are all good. Protein, like I say, I think because we had such high yields, we don't normally expect to grow yields like that. So the proteins are quite low. They're probably sort of 12% protein, a lot of the Crusoe winter wheat.
Right. Well, geez, that's even pretty good protein in fairness, given the yields that you're after getting, I think.
Yeah.
And when you go back, Andy, just in terms of, and again for, I suppose, mostly Irish listeners, if people over here were getting between 17 and 18% in terms of moisture content year on year in winter wheat, they'd be delighted to take it every year. For yourselves, it's probably under 15 most years, is it?
I'd usually budget to probably dry half of the wheat, I suppose. And some years I don't dry anything at all. And then like harvest like this year, we dry everything. Our drying system can come on floor drying from 18% down isn't too bad, but when you start to get above 18, we were cutting some stuff at 20 and stuff like that. And again, I appreciate that. Speaking to Irish farmers or even farmers in the north of England or Scotland, they'd be pretty happy to cut anything in the that sort of moisture. But for us, we're not really geared to it, and we've got a grain butler that can stir the grain, and if you stick stuff in our sheds at over 18%, you're pretty much guaranteed you're going to have to stir it. So again, that's another couple of days for somebody in the grain stores looking after that. So
and in terms of your setup, Andy, in terms of your harvest machinery and extra staff and that end, because I know you certainly said, as we were chatting to you earlier in the year, you have a very lean staff requirement for the size of farm you're on. How do you manage over the harvest period?
Yeah, I mean, it's we were tight this year. I normally there's a chap, Paul, who is retired from the farm. Normally comes in and helps hauling grain for us. Unfortunately, he was ill this year. He couldn't make it, so it ended up I took on a local fella who came hauling grain for us. Paul, who works for me for 8 months of the year, he drives the combine. And then I shared another tractor and trailer with, I had my eldest son. He hasn't unfortunately got a full driving license yet, but he was able to haul grain for me. I did a bit, and my wife jumped on it a bit as well. And Lucy is one of the owners here as well. She jumped on it. So we sort of shared, between all of us, we managed to get it all done. And then, it's just myself and Paul, pretty flat out on it, drilling cover crops in between times and what have you as well. So yeah, it was a busy few months. We need to get a bit better organised next year, I think.
So is the reason you're bringing your wife and your son out so you can actually see them? Because it sounds like you'd be very busy at harvest time. You wouldn't be at home a lot.
I know. He's farming mad like a lot of young lads. So he's a teenager and he wants to go to ag college next year. So yeah, he was glad of the experience.
Great. So you mentioned there by bypassing it there, you mentioned that you are, I suppose, starting preparing for the next year in the middle of harvest in terms of putting in cover crops and that kind of thing. Do you try to get much of those in as you're going through harvest, or do you have a kind of a target date for getting them in?
Yeah, I think in an ideal situation, I'd have somebody else here that could just sit on the drilling right behind the combine. I think the more they call it the 5-minute fallow. So basically, a lot of the guys who are switched on and have got the labour, they've got fellas that are sitting on a drill right up chasing the combine out of the field, and that would be the ideal situation. What we ended up doing, our CO8, so I bought an old Horse CO8, an 8-metre drill, and we left that sat on one tractor, and any downtime we had from combining, we were either me or Paul were on that drilling cover crops. And actually, it's one thing that we did get right this year. We were running pretty tight behind the combine, but being so dry, they chitted and grew okay because of our system, because we don't sort of lose a lot of moisture, but they didn't really get a lick on. If we'd had a couple of wet days in August, that would have helped us massively, I think, to get more growth. But yeah, you're right. We're sort of preparing ground for the following year.
But in terms of that, is it all ground? So if you're going from, let's just say, I'm not saying you're doing this now, but you're going from one winter crop to the next winter crop, and you only have that kind of 2-month or 3-month kind of fallow period in the middle, are you targeting that for cover crops as well?
This year I have some of it I have and some of it I haven't. So stuff that I think I'm going to drill fairly early. So for us, that would be last week of September. I probably wouldn't bother putting a cover crop in there. Stuff that I know I'm probably going to be drilling more towards the middle of October, I probably will put something in. Again, I was a bit greedy, I suppose. This year I had planned a bigger spring acreage, but the going was just so good in October that we kept drilling a bit more. So we were drilling into cover crops that we put in the summer this year. But generally, I don't worry too much. I don't think, unless we've got a long gap, but we don't grow oilseed rape or winter barley. So unless I'm going to have a long gap from harvest through to autumn drilling, I wouldn't bother, to be honest. I don't see the benefit. But for us, if you're cutting winter wheat middle of August and you're going to be planting 4 weeks later, I don't think the cover crops are worthwhile.
Okay. And in terms of the cover crops that are in there for a long time over the winter time, have you delved down the avenue of bringing animals into the place to try and graze them out?
We have at times, yeah. I've had sheep in. I'm very lucky, actually. There's a guy, Rob, nearby, who's got a flock of sheep, and he's very well kitted out and organised for electric fencing and everything. And he'll come and drop 200 ewes in and run them around. And he doesn't overgraze them. That can be a problem if they take it down too far. This year, we came and had a look, and they were so patchy, and they're great in places, but there's just not enough for him to stick he's got a big trailer behind his, stock box on a trailer, on a flatbed trailer that he brings over, and he said it's just not worth his while bringing them this year. There's just not enough there. So in the cover crops, so we haven't grazed them this year, but yeah, we have in the past, yeah.
So I suppose the other thing then, if you're not being grazed by that, other farmers might say, well, if you're not going to be grazed by that, you're probably going to be grazed by slugs. How do you find trying to put in the next, the I suppose the main crop in after the cover crops in terms of slugs or other pest issues?
I don't find slugs too much. Since we stopped growing oilseed rape, slugs are a lot less of an issue for us. And with the drills that we use, so the horse probably maybe potentially more slug problems after that, because it leaves the seed slot a bit open or a bit looser, but certainly not behind the horizon drill. The disc drill that we run, that puts it back pretty tight, so the slugs can't move about so much. I have used more slug pellets this year than I have for the last 2 years, but not for any particular. That's after our oats we've had to use slug pellets, and after a bit of some of the spring wheat, but not we haven't done the whole farm. We've done probably about 40% of what we've planted this autumn. 40% of the winter wheat had slug pellets on it, I'd say, this year. But I don't find slugs any worse, really. I never use slug pellets in the spring with a spring crop. I don't think I've ever, maybe once, but that was back when I'm going back probably 8-9 years ago when I had the Missouri strip till drill. We did use slug pellets then in the spring, or we had to, but no, I don't find slugs a problem after cover crops in the spring. Definitely not.
And Andy, just since we're talking about slug pellets, just in terms of what you're using, are you still allowed to use metaldehyde there? Because I know there's certain limitations on it, and I'm not sure whether the UK is getting rid of it a bit quicker than we are.
I haven't used metaldehyde for quite a few years now. I've been on the ferric phosphate for probably 3 or 4 years, just from an environmental point of view. But yeah, this was the last. You couldn't buy them, but you could use up. I think this autumn was the last time you could use metaldehyde, and that's it. They're gone now.
Okay, and you would be as happy in terms of the control of slugs with the ferric phosphate as you would have been with metaldehyde in the past?
Oh, definitely, yeah. I mean, obviously, there's different. Ferric phosphate's more expensive, but they're a much longer lasting pellet. And I know you could buy metaldehyde, more expensive metaldehyde that was longer lasting, but certainly with ferric phosphate, I've never had a problem. It's not as visual, certainly. You don't see the dead slugs like you see with metaldehyde, but we've applied them and the slugs have disappeared, so or the damage has stopped. You don't really see. All you see is the damage, the grazing stops, and yeah.
Okay. So you talked about a couple of varieties there, X-Days, I think, and Crusoe, I think were the 2 varieties you talked about. In terms of your starting point for choosing those varieties, where is it a look to what happened the previous year, or where do you kind of make that decision, if you like, in terms of what you're going to plant for the following year?
In terms of choosing variety, well, I mean, I'm on a contract. We grow Crusoe on contract. I've grown it for quite a few years. I quite like it. It seems to suit us well. Got pretty good disease resistance. Brown rust is its only sort of real weakness. So Crusoe would always be, a good chunk of our wheat acreage. And then it's a case of there'll be a bit of second wheat and balancing up the rest of it with probably just feed wheats. And I tend to try and pick out a few new varieties and maybe just get a couple of tons of seed and try it. And if we like it, we'll home save that and keep that for next year. X-Days was one of those. We had 20 hectares of X-Days this year, and it was absolutely amazing. So we've kept that and used some of that seed as seed for this year, if you like. So we've got a bit more X-Days in the ground this year. Theodore was an interesting variety. Again, I had 10 hectares of Theodore in the ground. No inputs on it other than fertilizer and trace elements. No fungicides at all. The bushel weight was dreadful. It was like pine needles, but the yield was there. It wasn't desperate yield-wise, and the gross margin on it was very good. So what I've done is bought some Costello, mixed it with a Theodore, and we've drilled the 2 sort of in a 50-50 blend. The thinking being, obviously, Costello's got a very good bushel weight and reasonable disease resistance, that we can hopefully use that as a lower input feed variety. So we've got 40 hectares of that in the ground. We'll see how that comes out. Whether we mix another variety in with that next year or not, I don't know. But we'll see how that goes. So this year I've got X-Days, the Theodore Costello mix, and Crusoe.
I suppose, look, it's an interesting departure, I suppose, in terms of mixing varieties, and there's a lot more people interested in it. I know certainly here in Oak Park we're starting to do a little bit of work on that. So it'll be interesting to see how that shakes out. But I haven't seen a huge amount of solid research results on it yet to see kind of where that's going to go. But we'll keep in touch with you to see how that's working along.
Yeah. I think there's a lot of people who'll be interested to see. There's a good few lads over here now. I can think of 3 or 4 guys who are doing more, probably 3 or 4 way blends, and there are similar varieties to the sort of Theodore, Costello, and maybe another in there as well. Some of the trial sites I've visited last summer, and Niab Tag over here, which they've been doing a lot of research. They've got a few trials with mixes in it as well. So
okay. And Andy, as regards the ideal planting dates, I know you mentioned that you might be starting somewhere around September, and I suppose given the difference or the direct drill type system you have, establishment system you have, is there an absolute ideal date for that? And I suppose secondly, I suppose peppered into that question is, what agronomic factors are you taking into account when you're going for that date?
I mean, the ideal date, if everything was equal, the best date for us to be planting would probably be the last week of September, around the 20th of September to start on cleaner ground. That's where we'll get our best yields. The trade-off though is blackgrass for us, and obviously, in an ideal world from a blackgrass point of view, you don't want to be drilling before the middle of October. And from a no-till point of view, I always work on the theory of 2 weeks earlier in the autumn and 2 weeks later in the spring when we start. It just needs the ground to be that bit warmer for the crops to get away. They haven't got that mineralization with a bit of cultivation, so they need a little bit extra to get them away. So yeah, we started in last week September drilling, and in hindsight, if I'd known what the weather was going to be, I would have left it later, because those early drilled fields are full of blackgrass. We put a fairly robust pre-emergence and a peri-emergence herbicides on, but we've still got, in places some pretty bad blackgrass. 2 fields I'm thinking of, probably 10 hectares, where we'll have to spring crop that now. They're actually going into an environmental scheme, so I might just pull them out, or one of them certainly, and put it straight into the environmental scheme. It would be into a wild bird mix anyway. So
you're thinking, Andy, is you won't be able to get on top of the blackgrass for the rest of the season? No,
there's nothing post emergence on those. I can live with. Again, there's something I learned. We had a couple of fields where with some pretty bad patches of blackgrass in it, and the yields, it did drop off. I mean, real bad blackgrass problem can drop you sort of 2 to 3 tons a hectare. And we had some patches. If it's not too thick, I can live with it. But you've got to accept that you're not going to grow a winter crop in there the following year. You're going to have to flip over to a spring crop, and I can live with that. That's fine. So I know on the ground where I've got the winter wheat we planted early this year, the Crusoe's in early, we'll have to that's destined to be a spring crop next year, because there'll be such a heavy seed return of blackgrass in there.
And just for that, Andy, do you have an idea that your blackgrass is pretty well resistant to the ALSs, is it?
Yeah, definitely, yes. We did some testing quite a few years ago, and we had a full suite of resistance. So flufenicet's about the only thing that really you can get a good lump of flufenicet on early, but it was fairly, again, we've had such a dry autumn that I don't think they've worked that well. The later drilling, the preems have worked much better, where we've drilled sort of into mid to late October. And I did try some Precluse as well from Bayer this year on a smaller area. That's done a really good job. So, you can't, I'm kicking myself a little bit, because I mean, it's one of those that, do you leave it late and risk that you don't get everything drilled, or do you drill early and risk there's a bit of blackgrass? And I'm a bit disappointed, because I thought where we had drilled early, those fields were fairly clean. There were spring oats last year, and not much blackgrass in the spring oats. So there was obviously still a fair seed bank there that we've has chitted and grown this year, unfortunately.
Sure, look, hindsight's a great thing for all these kind of things, isn't it?
Exactly.
Brilliant. And I might actually ask you for a bit of foresight now. In terms of 2022, looking forward to the new year, is there anything farming-wise now, anything that you're really looking forward to in 2022? And on the same kind of thing, or maybe the opposite side of the coin, is there something you think is coming along that's probably going to cause you a few headaches?
I think I'm looking forward to watching the wheat market. It's pretty good at the moment. I haven't sold anything for next year. We've still got stuff in the shed. I've been selling bits and pieces here over the last month or so, and the price is just, it's good at the moment. I bought all my fertilizer last June. I probably paid about £80 a ton more than I did last year, but it's all in the shed here, and it's all
purchase.
It looks cheap now at the moment. I'm not looking forward to seeing the fertilizer prices next year, because they might drop a bit, but I don't think the chat and the trade over here is that high fert prices are here to stay. And but equally, I think high grain prices are here for a little while as well. And so on the back of that, I see this coming spring as a chance to experiment and see how low can we go, how much better we can be with our nitrogen, how much more efficient we can be. Can we use other forms of nitrogen? Can we use biostimulants and stuff as well? So that's my sort of I've sort of signed up to get the use of an end tester from Yara for the spring, and we're looking at there's some products coming from one manufacturer. There's sort of two guys up in York who think they can give us better nitrogen use efficiency with stuff that we can put down at drilling. So I'm looking at, we're changing drill, another Horizon drill is actually, we've ordered, long story on that, but we're getting another Horizon drill, and I'm just debating whether to put a liquid system on that I can put seed drenches down, possibly fertilizer as well. So just to try and make us more efficient with fertilizers. So yeah, that's the sort of plan, I think, for the spring anyway.
Well, it's certainly great to hear that there's a lot to look forward to, certainly in there. I know there's a few other things, but you're as ever, Andy, you're experimenting, you're learning, and I think certainly by the sounds of it, you're improving your farm as you go.
Yeah, we're trying to. I think you've got to be doing. The trouble is, you can go and look at trials, and no disrespect to you guys at Chargus, you're doing lots of trials and feeding information back to farmers as well. But I also think, you can't beat seeing stuff on your own farm and in your own situation. And I've had varieties where I've looked at them in trials, going back to days when I grew oilseed rape, varieties that were breeders said that they're never no good, and you look at them in trials and no good. And actually, I had one particular Alienor was a great variety that grew really well here for us, seemed to suit the farm well. And so I think actually it's important to do a few trials on the farm here as well, and look at stuff yourself, and particularly with yield mapping and stuff nowadays, it's quite easy to pick out results.
Yeah, Andy, you're very good to give up your time again for us, and as always, extremely interesting conversation with you. I'm delighted to hear you get on so well in 2021, and look, I hope we can touch base with you again in 2022 and see how you're getting on through the year. Thanks again, Andy, and happy Christmas to you and to your family.
Thank you very much, Michael, and yeah, happy Christmas to you and all the listeners.
So that's it for the Tillage Edge this side of Christmas, and my thanks to Andy for joining me on the podcast. We hope to get back to Andy at some stage in early spring next year. So finally, don't forget, if you like the podcast, then recommend it to a friend or colleague, and as always, rate, review and subscribe on Apple Podcasts or Spotify so you never miss an episode. And for more information, go to chargus.ie. I'm Michael Hennessy. Thanks for listening, and have a very happy Christmas, and I'll be back next week with more tillage news and advice.